What's the most disturbing secret you've discovered about someone close to you?
Story 1. I discovered that my sister stole my father's $25,000 Rolex not more than 24 hours after he passed away. I only discovered it when her and her husband made a frivolous purchase, and I wondered where they got their money, since they were always broke and begging my parents for money. I got suspicious. It hit me that she might have stolen and sold the Rolex. Had the paperwork, ran a track on the sales history, and discovered it had been sold to a pawn shop down the street from where my sister lives. Went to the pawn shop and, after a bit of persuasion, got them to tell me who sold it to them, and it was my sister. Me and my mom disowned her. It never ceases to amaze me, not only that people with absolutely no shame and no scruples exist outside of fiction, but also what they're prepared to do in order to satisfy their own greed. As my grandmother took her last breath, she laid there on her bed in her room, unalive. My mother, sister, brother, aunt, and I were with her. She was an amazing woman. It was a terribly sad event to lose her. My aunt began putting lotion on her hands. At the time, I don't think any of us thought much of it. I think I recall thinking, "Oh, that's sweet." It was a little strange, but I just thought she was doing it because my grandma's hands may have looked dry, and it was maybe the last time she'd ever be able to do something like that for her. My sister yells out in a very angry, aggressive tone, "You're a freaking witch!" And we all kind of step back, like, whoa, what the F just happened? What's going on here? We're all puzzled, looking at my sister like, what was that about? She then says, "She just slipped her rings off her fingers." That was a bad day. My aunt then rushed the sale on the house, even though my mom didn't want to sell it at all. My family has been fractured ever since that day. Instantly, I knew the rings came off. Dang. Me too. My grandfather had his wedding ring stolen during his last moments when he was in a coma. We know it was one of the hospital staff, but don't know who because no proof. Security told us it happened a lot. When my husband was getting admitted to the ICU, the ER staff told me to take his wedding band and keep it with me because it will 100% get stolen. I am so lucky I still have it. My grandma had 12 kids. The second oldest son was mentally challenged and lived with her whole life. When she passed, about 10 of us went over and renovated the house, got Grand's trinkets out, fixed our mentally challenged family member up with a new bed, new TV, new appliances, demolished a few walls, and really made the place just for him. Shortly after, one of our aunts came to visit, slept in the bed and left him in a cot, took him to the bank and attached herself to the account. He took the whole inheritance, making purchases off his account, and then she started moving all the valuable things out of the house. I lived closest, about 40 minutes away, and when I went to visit the next month, it looked like the house had been looted, and the aunt had moved back to hers, 5 hours away. This mentally challenged uncle lived a few years on his own until we realized how constantly people tried to take advantage of him. Then we moved him into a facility. A mentally challenged 70-year-old in a suburban bungalow with just enough to suit the basic necessities. Disgusting, the humans out there.
Story 2. The 24 hours before my dad died, stage 4 lung cancer, he was in the ER and then the ICU, and we were unable to be with him because of hospital COVID rules. My mother, sister, and I had been texting and calling him all day and got no response. My mother even called the hospital and spoke with one of his ICU nurses who said he was awake and communicating fine. He passed very quickly at 3:30 a.m. the next morning. We were allowed to be at his bedside, but by then, he was no longer conscious. So we said our goodbyes, and he was gone. Later that morning, while my mom slept, I was calling cremation services to schedule his body for pickup at the hospital and going through his bag of belongings the hospital had returned to us. His phone was there, and I wanted to read all our texts and take some comfort in my last words to him. I opened his phone, and all our texts had not been read. Not mine or my mom and sister's. I thought this was so odd, but figured he must have been suffering so much he couldn't find the strength. I began to scroll through his apps and noticed a chat app I'd vaguely heard of. I can't recall the name, but it essentially works like WhatsApp. I opened the app and saw a single contact with a female name. I started reading and realized my dad has been chatting with this girl hourly for the last 24 hours, and as far back as I could scroll. He was calling her princess and telling her he loved her, and she was saying she was scared for him and wanted to know what was going on, why he was in the ER. I scrolled back enough to know that this was someone he was having, at the very least, an emotional affair with. My grief was completely hijacked by hurt and anger, and a week later I tracked the girl down and spoke to her via DMs, and found out she was 19 years old. She was 17 when they met. He was her high school bus driver, and she told me they had been dating for almost 2 years. My dad was 66 years old when he died, and dating someone younger than his grandchildren, someone he chose to spend his last moments with and say his last goodbyes to. I hope it made him happy, but it sure is a crappy secret to live the rest of my life with. A secret that will forever overshadow my entire relationship with my dad, with no chance to ever speak to him about it. It's the one secret I wish I'd never found out. I'm an adoptee and have found my biological mother. She never talked about how she became pregnant with me, nor did she give me the name of my biological father. She has since passed. Sometimes I think that I may be better off not knowing. Story 3. She was my best friend of 7 years. We had literally been through it all together. I moved out of state with my now husband, but she convinced us both to move back to be closer with her after about a year. We had no real ties to the state we had tried out, so we said, screw it, let's go back. She's basically family. We were all so happy to be reunited. She was over almost every night for dinner. We all laughed and talked and had a blast. Best year of my life. Then, slowly, she started trying to turn my husband and I against each other. Anytime we had an argument, like any couple does, she would text each of us about how right we were, trying to foster animosity between the two of us. With me, she started talking about how she had a plan B for us, that if my husband and I couldn't make it work, I could move in with her and we'd live happy lives together. With my husband, she started talking about her infertility issues and how she wanted to have a kid just like him. She just needed a sperm donor. This all happened at around the same time, and my husband and I compared texts and figured it out. She wanted to take his sperm and have a baby with me. When confronted about it, she refused to admit anything and started lashing out at both of us. It got to the point where she would show up unannounced, banging on the door, demanding a place in our home. It was so terrifying and panic-inducing that we ended up having to move and change our phone numbers. I guess it's so disturbing because I had never had a friend like her, only to find out that she cared about me, but in such an unhealthy and scary way. But yeah, that's my story. Husband and I are great now, by the way. Good plot for a movie. So glad you and your husband are doing well. I'd be surprised if there weren't already a dozen Lifetime originals with this or similar plots. Story 4. One night as a kid, I heard my parents having an explosive argument in their bedroom, which suddenly went quiet. The door was closed and locked. I found out during a drunk phone call from my mother it was because she attempted to shoot my father in the face with a .303, but it didn't go off when she pulled the trigger as there were no bullets. They were both horrified and just stared at each other, apparently. They're still together. With a .303? Like a Lee Enfield rifle? What the frick? Your parents get in a fight and your mom's first thought is all, for queen and country. I would expect that the answer to that question is yes, and that the OP is Australian. The Lee Enfield was the service rifle for Australia until the 1950s. It was made there in a different version until the 50s, and when it was phased out, there were lots available for surplus. Lots of farms had them. Lots of farmers were veterans and trained to use them. Are they happy now? Happy is such a strong word. My father actually laughs about it these days. Super healthy stuff. Why are they still together if she had the intent to murder him? What the F? Excellent question. One I have no answer to. My mother-in-law shot her late husband and was arrested. That's not how he died, though. They got back together and he eventually died from a cardiac event. People are intense. My grandmother talked about a neighbor lady that shot her husband in the head, and he went to court with her to testify on her behalf. They got back together after he got out of the hospital. Died married. Wasn't that going to be the case if she'd had a better aim? Story 5. A work colleague appeared on the front page of a national newspaper for a life of fraudulent qualifications. He claimed medical and law degrees, was a brigadier in the Army Reserves, and was the CEO for a major health fund. He actually was a brigadier in the Army Reserves, but that and the health fund role were largely built on the fraudulent qualifications and a progression of jobs also based on these claims. In reality, the only qualification he actually held was as a mortuary assistant. Not even his wife knew. The fraudulent degrees had been gained when he was in the Army Reserves recruiting, and he had access to submitted position applications. He came undone when he applied for a government job, and some flags were raised by the recruitment people. He tried to withdraw the application, but didn't realize that an application for a government role has the same weight as a statutory declaration and cannot be withdrawn. It all went south very quickly, and he ended up doing jail time. The absolute freaking balls to apply for government work while spinning these lies. He should have stayed away from government jobs. It could have worked out quite well for him. People who worked with him said he was generally competent, although he was well known for far-fetched stories, particularly if they started to question his claims. The positions he was filling were largely administrative and leadership positions, and didn't rely on him having medical or law degrees, so they simply got him to the front of the queue in the interview process. Nevertheless, he was successful in the roles. When it all came out, he was an utter embarrassment to the recruitment industry and ended up being used as a training example for background checks. Story 6. So, my grandmother, who's been estranged from my family for a long time now for a multitude of reasons, has this weird thing where she has to share food with people. Are you ordering steak at the restaurant? Well, oh boy, she's got to order the same thing even if she doesn't like steak. Try her drink, it's really good. Take the first bite of chicken to let her know if it's any good. This always really annoyed me, 'cause I hate sharing food. One day I brought it up to my mom, and she was like, "Oh yeah, Grandma is afraid of being poisoned, so she wants other people to try it first." So let me get this straight. Grandma thinks someone is trying to poison her, so she has me try the food first? And it makes so much sense looking back, because she literally would not take a bite of anything she ordered until someone else had a bite first. Thanks, Grandma. I wonder if it was just mental illness and paranoia, maybe schizophrenic. I wonder if she had any other symptoms. Or did someone literally try and poison her once, and she was just that petrified of it happening again? Incredibly messed up that she subjected other family to her perceived potential poison, though. She has severe anxiety, but that's about all I've heard as far as an explanation. She's also a narcissist, abused her children, and all of them no longer talk to her. I don't really know too much about how she's doing now. Story 7. While my cousin was walking around with her son in the woods, she came across a hunting stand. She climbed it and found a pair of binoculars. Sitting straight forward and lifting the binoculars to her eyes, she saw her own bedroom window. Let's be logical here. If it was a legit hunting stand, it was facing, and closer than 500 feet to a residence, which is illegal, which means it had to come down with prejudice. If it was a peeping Tom, well, it had to come down with prejudice. When my brother and I visited not long after, she showed us where it was. We tore it down and literally wrapped it around a couple trees. Bent the fricker to complete uselessness. I got an angry call the next day. "Did you tear down a hunting stand yesterday?" F yeah, I did. "That was your uncle's," her mother's brother. Turns out my cousin reported it to the family, and they ignored the issue. When the uncle was asked, he said there was just an old treehouse out there. Even when he was exposed, they didn't really care. They were more upset about the damage we did. Suffice to say, I have written off most of that side of the family. Edit. The uncle in question is now dead. He died January 16th. To be clear, are you saying that your cousin's father was spying on her? Story 8. When my grandfather passed away, we discovered that he did not exist. His name was not in any government registry. He was a normal citizen, paid taxes, had a license and everything, lived a long life, married to my grandmother for over 50 years, had multiple children, everything normal. Still, to this day, no one knows who he really was and why he had a false name. My 2 times great-grandfather had fake records. He lied on every census. Each one was different. His military papers and other records all say he was born in different places on different dates. He lived in Virginia, but was known by the family as the Austrian. Nobody knows why he was shifty about his origins, 1865 to 1937. Is it possible that he wasn't registered at birth? I have relatives who guesstimate their ages because their parents never registered them. And in certain areas and certain times, babies passed around a lot. When my mother and sisters were doing our family history, we found several infants had been passed back and forth between families and names changed multiple times. All of it was unofficial and not documented on government lists, which made compiling information ridiculously difficult and impossible at times, because anyone who knew what baby was from what family were long dead. Story 9. My brother was stealing money from father who had dementia. This went on for a year, and then I found out about it because the bank who had my father's mortgage called me wondering why it hadn't been paid in 6 months. My father's bank account went into the negative around this time too, and when I confronted my brother about it, he said, "Well, I gotta pay my bills." I was about to take control of all the accounts and make sure the stuff got back on track, but my father ended up in the hospital and passed away shortly after that. My brother also stole some of my inheritance too. In the end, he stole over $5,000 from his dying father. I have a brother actively stealing money from my parents. He's a do-nothing, a liar, and a stoner, and my parents are huge enablers because they don't want to be mean. So they let him steal even though they know about it. They confronted him once, and he said, "Calm down, it's not that big of a deal." Dementia runs through my family. I'm honestly expecting to get zero money when my parents pass because my brother will have stolen it all and spent it on drugs and video games and KFC. Story 10. After my husband died in 2020, I found out he had been having an affair with a 30-year-old. He was 55. She apparently aborted his baby. Everything he told me about his prior life was a lie, second marriage for both of us, and he had been sleeping with men since he was in his early 20s. To sum it up, I didn't know this man at all. We had been together 10 years and married for 6. Wait, he was having an affair with a woman, got her pregnant, and was sleeping with men too? Where do people find this kind of time? He was an executive who left home at the crack of dawn. He was leaving work at 2 to meet this woman, visiting men at bathhouses downtown at lunch. He never went out at night. It's doable. Unbelievable, but doable. Story 11. I wasn't close to this person, but I did hang out with them a few times. The best man at my wedding had another really close friend who turned out to be a serial killer. It messed him up really badly. He already had mental health issues, and this sent him over the edge. I can't even talk to him anymore. I miss you, man. So sorry to hear about your friend. Something similar happened to one of my best friends in middle school. He was friends with 2 brothers who also had an older brother. My friend and the 2 brothers were planning on having a sleepover at the brother's house, but at the last minute changed it to my best friend's house. The older brother and his friend ended up murdering the parents, but not before the dad stabbed and killed the friend. They lived directly behind him. Story 12. My coworker lets her dog hump her leg every morning until he releases, while she has her coffee, which has stayed with me since I heard it. I can't think of anything else when they talk to me. The stuff some people admit, man. You wouldn't be able to torture this information out of me. It would be the first thing to admit, though, seeing as the torturers would go, "What the F is this man?" and just forget to torture you further upon hearing this messed up info. I had a high school teacher who told the class she didn't get her chihuahua neutered and sometimes had to finish it for its sake. Who the F admits that to the class they teach? This is freaking incredible. That's absolutely not the right word, but I'm almost laughing and don't know what the F to do with myself. Story 13. I found out that the reason why one of my uncles didn't want to go back to Korea when he retired was that he couldn't. He was fearful of political reprisals if he tried to return. Turns out his brother was part of the group that assassinated the South Korean president back in 1979, and his own innocence was never proven. So he was in fear of getting arrested if he ever tried to go back. Not even using a burner account. What a mad lad. Jesus freaking Christ, dude. Just dropped a bomb larger than Reddit nonchalantly. Seriously, how often do you get to see someone who is linked to a presidential assassination in any way? Story 14. My grandfather beat someone to death. My dad was an only child, but my grandmother was once pregnant with my dad's younger brother. When she was 6 months pregnant, someone in construction equipment ran over the car she was driving, and she lost the baby. While she was in the hospital, my grandfather found the guy and beat him to death. From what I understand, he was in jail for about a week before he was released. Apparently, he claimed temporary insanity due to the circumstances. I learned all this about 4 years ago when my brother was researching family history and asked my grandfather about it. I've always seen him as a nice little old man. Story 15. Found a scrapbook of my mom and a guy I didn't recognize from her immediately post-college days. Turns out he was a long-term boyfriend of hers who killed himself when she broke up with him. My grandfather found his body. I learned at age 20 by finding the book or shrine to him. I'd say 20 is probably on the low end of good ages to learn this fact, if you must. All I can think of is how much that would have messed up your mother mentally. I hope she's okay. Story 16. My mom received birthday cards with money in them for years from her parents. She kept the cards with the money in them, saving to buy a piano for sentimental reasons. My sister, who has repeatedly stolen from family members, found the collection of cards and money and took them. My mom only wanted the cards back when she realized what happened. My sister denied everything. Screw you, Emily. Yeah, screw you, Emily. All my homies hate Emily. Story 17. Graduated boot camp and wondered why my brother wouldn't talk to me. Turns out he was screwing my ex while I was there instead of delivering my letters. I guess guilt ate him up and he thought it was simpler to keep up the lie and not have a brother. Right up until an old friend from my hometown told me what happened. Story 18. My best friend confessed to me that he has a child as a result of a long-distance affair in another country. He has 3 kids in the U.S. and is in a toxic marriage. His wife doesn't know. I'll be out late, honey. Got a thing in Argentina for the weekend. Story 19. Son who poisoned his sick father while in hospital. Months later, he went camping with his wife and returned dead on arrival from a knife accident. She took the inheritance and married his cousin. Sounds to me like she may be behind both deaths. It feels very Macbeth for sure. Story 20. My great-grandmother was married to 3 different people at the same time. The men were from different branches of the military. She was collecting all 3 of their paychecks at a time. Is your family sure who your great-grandfather is? That's a valid question. Story 21. My mom sent me a news article last night. My cousin murdered someone and is in jail. I guess it's less of a secret now, but it's really been affecting me. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.